Not many people realize that fat can have a direct impact on development of diabetes. So in this video, I will be discussing how to reduce harmful fats from your diet to reduce belly fat and help reverse diabetes. Hi guys, my name is Shaista Zahiruddin. I am a registered dietitian and welcome to this series of how to prevent diabetes for the South Asian population in North America. In the last video, I discussed how visceral fat, which is a fat in our belly area, can build up over time and cause insulin resistance, which leads to a lot of diseases including diabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome, metabolic syndrome, and so many different diseases. Usually people, even if they have a flat belly, can have visceral fat because visceral fat is the hidden type of fat which is near our organs. And when too much of that is built up, then you start seeing belly fat. So there are tools out there that can measure this. I have a weighing scale. I'll put the link to that in the description box below. And basically it measures the amount of visceral fat in your body. So let's talk about how food and nutrition can impact visceral fat. Research has shown that it's not only the amount of fat that we eat that can have an impact on insulin resistance, but it also depends on the quality of the fat. There are two types of fats that are very harmful for health. One is known as trans fats and the other is known as saturated fats. Now, what is trans fat? Trans fat is when liquid fats and oils are converted to solid fats by a chemical process. This fat is very, very harmful for our body, and this will lead to insulin resistance. Some of the foods that have trans fat include things that are processed, mostly things that you buy from a supermarket, especially pastries and cakes. So if you think about margarine, or I can't believe it's not butter, these are liquid oils that have been converted to solid fats. There are actually margarines out there which are made with non-hydrogenated, that's the key word you're looking for, non-hydrogenated margarines, and these have very little to almost no trans fats. So those would be better if you are someone who already eats margarine, then go for non-hydrogenated margarines. Other foods that have a lot of trans fats in them are a lot of desi snacks. So things like churwa and khara, a lot of them have a little bit of trans fat in them. So my recommendation to you is look in your pantry, look at the food label. Make sure you see the portion size or the serving size that this label is about, and go and look at the total fat, and just below it there is trans fat. This should be 0. If you have anything that is above 0.5 grams of trans fat, I recommend throw them out, okay? If you can't throw them out, or if you feel that it's not an option for you, then make sure you have them no more than 1 time per month, and it should be the exact portion that's on the label or even less at that event. In US, if there is less than 0.5 gram of trans fat, it is okay for them to label it as 0 trans fat. So remember, even though a lot of foods might say 0 trans fat, there still might be just a little bit there. So be careful not to go above the recommended portion size. Now, other foods that have a lot of harmful kinds of fat are processed meats. And by processed meat, I'm talking about hot dogs, sausages, salamis, pepperoni. For some people, this is their everyday lunch. But these foods are very high in saturated fat and very high in trans fat and sodium. There is a direct link of processed meats with colon cancer. So it is best to start reducing your processed meat intake in your diet. Whether it's from a turkey or a chicken or even red meat, it doesn't matter. Any processed meat is harmful, and it is recommended to limit them to no more than 1 time a month. If you habitually have processed meats or deli meats every day or every alternate day in the week, then try to reduce it to 1 time a week. But your goal should be to limit it to 1 time or less per month in order to prevent belly fat increase and the visceral fat and reversing diabetes. Now, the second type of fat that is really harmful for you is saturated fat. Now, saturated fat is very common in a lot of our foods. Some of the biggest sources of saturated fat is fatty meats, high-fat dairy products, processed foods like I mentioned before, and some oils, which I'll talk in another video. Now, research suggests that having a lot of saturated fat in your diet can and will lead to increased belly fat, increased inflammation, increased cholesterol, and diabetes and heart attacks. So that means that we need to start reducing saturated fats in our diet. But the goal is not like trans fat. Trans fat is the worst. Think about the traffic lights. So red is stop. You don't want any trans fats. And then the yellow light is the saturated fat. You want a little bit, but very little. And then there are the green fats where you can have a little bit more. Obviously, the portions should be controlled. Based on the health authorities in US and in Canada, we want to reduce your saturated fat intake to about 5% of your total calories maximum. If you are an average person who has a 1500 calorie diet for men and 1200 calorie diet for women, for example, then your limit is about 8 grams of saturated fat in one day. And for women, it's about 6 grams of saturated fat. So between 6 and 8 grams of saturated fat is allowed and is considered a healthy balance. But any more than that can have harmful effects on our body. So some of the known saturated fats are from the skins of meats. So the skin of chicken, for example, or turkey. All the visible fat that you can see on your meats and your red meats should be removed, because those are essentially where all the saturated fat is. There is some saturated fat hidden inside the tissue of the muscle of the animal, but the most common ones are the visible fat, so you want to completely remove them. If some of your recipes call for having fat or skin of chicken, limit that again to no more than 1 time per month. So if you are making pie or nihari or bone broth, or you're making rotisserie chicken, limit that to 1 time a month. That way you are reducing the saturated fat, reducing the belly fat and the insulin resistance that can result from that. The next thing that you have to remember is that red meats have a lot more saturated fat than white meats. So your red meats like your lamb and your beef have between 6 to 8 grams of saturated fat in a small single portion, about half a cup or just a palm size. That is the maximum amount of your daily requirement of saturated fat. Then what do you do about other food products that have some saturated fat in it? Oils have saturated fat in them. Dairy products, your milk will have saturated. There are a lot of foods that have naturally a little bit of saturated fat in them. So if you max your budget on just red meats, then you have nothing else that you can eat in the day. You can't eat nuts, you can't eat seeds, all these foods that are healthy for you. That is why it's recommended that you reduce your red meats to less than 1 time a week. And then you have things like chicken and fish, which are known as white meats. These have between 1 to 3 grams of saturated fat for the same serving of a red meat. So that means that you have a little bit more room for other healthy foods so that your total amount can come to between 6 to 8 grams. Now, on a side note, I wanted to talk a little bit about reducing meats in your diet. This includes meats from chicken or red meats, it doesn't matter. The fact is that our ancestors have never eaten so much meat as much as we're eating today. You know, back when we used to be farmers and our ancestors and our grandparents, their farm animals were mostly used for protection, for grazing, for wool, maybe for milk, and for other uses, for plowing their fields. A lot of the animals in the farms were used mostly for other uses and not so much for meat. And it takes about 1.5 to 2 years for an animal to mature before it might be used for meats. So animals in the farms were hardly slaughtered for meats maybe a couple times a month or maybe a couple times a week, depending on how many animals they had. That means that we've never ever eaten so much meat before as much as we're eating today. I believe most of our non-veg desi population are eating meat almost every day, and I'm not far from this. My family eats meat every single day, every single meal, which is sad, but it has become our lifestyle. We have a lot of meat coming in, but this had never been the case for our bodies before. This is why our bodies don't know how to react to so much meat. And meat has always traditionally been used for celebrations or for feasts. Sometimes when there are big gatherings or some guests come over, then an animal had been slaughtered, but they had never eaten meat on a regular basis. So when it comes to meal planning for diabetes prevention, I recommend try to eat at least one meatless meal every day of the week. This will get you started on experimenting with different kinds of legumes and different kind of recipes where meat doesn't have to be the center of attention. Generally, a diabetes prevention diet would include at least 3 to 5 days that are meatless. But for starting, I say if you can maintain one meatless meal for one entire month, that is an excellent progress towards prevention of diabetes. Now, what I would suggest in the following month is try to increase that to about 2 meatless days in your week. Now, what can you have on the other days of the week? I suggest if you can limit your red meats, at least start with 2 days a week of red meats. So if you are someone who eats lamb or goat or beef very often, then reduce that to at least 2 days a week. So we have 1 day meatless, we have 2 days of red meats. I would also recommend having fish once every week. Now you must be wondering why fish. So going back to our ancestors, most of civilizations have started near water. If you think of any civilization, whether it be Egyptian, Indian, European, any society had always been established where there's water. And the reason for that is first water, of course, but also the sea creatures in the water. Fish may be the only food that had been eaten from probably beginning of time. And fish has so many benefits that we are not getting enough of. From my experience, most South Asians hardly eat fish even once a month. There are some, obviously, geographically, if they are close to water, that they have high fish intake in their diet. But most South Asians, especially in North America, are void of fish in their diet. Fish has healthy fats, which actually compete and replace harmful fats. They have also anti-inflammatory power. So basically having more fish in your diet improves your immune system so you can fight off anything your body doesn't need and therefore fight off insulin resistance. And it's excellent for brain health, for improvement of memory, and for prevention of Alzheimer's even. So there are a lot of benefits that fish have, and I can't cover all of that in today's session. But my point to you is having fish at least once a week will get you started on improving your chances of reversing diabetes. So when it comes to meal planning, 1 meatless day, 2 red meats if you're regularly eating red meat, 1 fish day a week, and the remaining days you can decide if you want to have chicken or something else. Eventually, in a month or 2, I would like you to progress to having 2 meatless days and 2 days for fish and 1 red meat day and 2 days for chicken. And this goal is a very, very good goal to stick to. You can keep this for at least 3 or 4 months or even half a year or a year. If you can keep that, you're still on a good place. But if you want to move to the next level, the best meal plan would be having meatless meals 3 to 4 times a week, 2 fish in a week, 1 or 2 days for chicken, and 0 or 1 day for red meats. And this, if you can maintain for the rest of your life, you are on a good track of prevention and even management of a lot of diseases. So to conclude, my take-home message to you is today, first of all, go and look at the food labels on your pantry and in your fridge to look for any foods that have any trans fat in them. And make sure if you have even 0.5 grams of trans fat in that food, put them out and then try to figure out how you can replace them. If you don't know how you can replace them, put in the comments below and I will give you suggestions. Second thing, look up recipes for fish and meatless meals. Now there is a website called Meatless Mondays, which actually has a lot of meatless recipes that you can try when you're getting started. Go ahead, do your best. I'll come back next week with another video of how to prevent diabetes. And one more note, if you want meal plans and if you can't wait till next week for another video, I have made a few meal plans that you can download and start using right away. And those will be linked in the description box below. Have a great day and see you next week.